I thought I was signing a routine document to help my brother, but within days I realized I had signed away my entire property. My own blood had betrayed me, and what happened next will leave you speechless. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to my channel, because more shocking stories like this are waiting for you. Family. People always say it's the one thing in life you can count on. Friends may come and go, money might slip through your hands, but blood is forever. That's what my father used to tell me when I was a kid. He'd look at me and my younger brother Daniel and say, "No matter what happens, you two take care of each other, promise me." Back then, it wasn't hard to promise. Daniel and I were inseparable. Just 2 years apart, we grew up like twins. If I scraped my knee, he cried louder than I did. If he got into trouble at school, I was the first to defend him. We shared clothes, secrets, even dreams of building something bigger than the life we were born into. But life doesn't wait for childhood dreams. When our father passed away suddenly, I was only 20, and Daniel was just 18. Overnight, everything changed. The playful brotherhood turned into responsibility. My mother was devastated, and it fell on me to step up. Daniel was still finishing high school, still trying to figure out who he was. So, I made the choice that defined the rest of my life. I gave up my own college ambitions and threw myself into work. Day after day, I hustled. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to make sure the bills were paid, that my brother had food, clothes, and the chance to finish school without worry. I remember nights when I'd come home, my hands blistered and my body aching, but seeing Daniel sitting at the table, books spread out, studying, it made it all worth it. I told myself, if I carry the weight now, maybe one day Daniel will fly free. Years passed. Slowly, painfully, I managed to save enough money to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of town. To anyone else, it might have looked like nothing, just dirt and weeds, but to me it was everything. It was proof that my sacrifice meant something. I poured every ounce of strength I had into building a modest home there. Brick by brick, nail by nail, it was my creation, my sanctuary. And of course, Daniel lived there too. It wasn't just my house, it was ours. I never questioned it. He was my brother. Every time I handed him money, every time I put food on his plate, I didn't see it as charity. I saw it as love, as duty, as family. At that time, I truly believed blood could never betray blood, but I couldn't have been more wrong. For years, Daniel lived under my roof without a single worry. Rent, never asked for it. Food, always shared. Even when I struggled, I never let him feel the weight of the world pressing on my shoulders. But somewhere along the way, something in him began to change. At first, it was subtle. He started dressing better than me, even though he didn't have a stable job. He bought the newest phone, the flashiest shoes. I asked him how he could afford it, and he would laugh it off, saying, "Don't worry about it, brother, I've got connections." I brushed it off. Maybe he was finally figuring things out. Maybe life was rewarding him for once. But then the whispers started. Neighbors hinting about Daniel's new friends, shady-looking people hanging around late at night. One evening, I caught him slipping out with a man I didn't recognize, holding a briefcase. When I asked him about it, he snapped, "Why are you always questioning me? I'm not a kid anymore." That was the first time I saw true anger in his eyes. It was like looking at a stranger. Still, I reminded myself of our father's words, family first. I told myself Daniel was just young, just trying to find his place in the world. But deep down, unease began to grow inside me. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel sat me down at the dining table with a wide smile. "Brother," he said smoothly, sliding a stack of papers toward me, "I need your help. This is just a small formality, some paperwork for the property for tax benefits. Nothing major, you just need to sign here." I was exhausted from a 14-hour shift. My body was begging me for sleep, and the last thing I wanted was to read through a mountain of legal jargon. Daniel must have sensed my hesitation, because he leaned in and added, "You trust me, right? After everything we've been through, don't you?" That word trust, it pierced my heart. Of course I trusted him. He was my brother, the boy I carried through childhood, the man I sacrificed my future for. So, without thinking twice, I picked up the pen and signed. I had no idea that in that moment I wasn't just signing a piece of paper. I was signing away everything I had worked for. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes. Letters arriving in Daniel's name. Phone calls that he would quickly hush when I walked into the room. I tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut, but it only grew worse. Finally, one morning, a stranger knocked on my door with a cold expression and a folded document in his hand. "Excuse me," he said, "but this property no longer belongs to you." My heart stopped. That was the day I realized my own brother had tricked me. The stranger's words hit me like a thunderbolt. "This property no longer belongs to you." At first, I thought it had to be some mistake. I laughed nervously and said, "You must have the wrong house. I bought this land with my own blood and sweat." But when he handed me the official papers, my hands trembled. There it was, in black and white, my signature right next to Daniel's name, transferring full ownership of my property to him. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the chair. My chest felt like it was caving in. That land, that house, it wasn't just brick and soil. It was years of sacrifice, the symbol of my survival, the only thing I thought I could pass on to my children one day. And now, in a single stroke of a pen, it was gone. I stormed into Daniel's room, the papers shaking in my hands. "What have you done?" I shouted. He looked up at me, completely calm, almost smug. "Relax, brother," he said coldly. "You're overreacting. You don't understand business. I know how to make this property worth something. It's better in my name. Trust me, it's for the best." His words burned through me. For the best? For whom? Certainly not for me. For years I carried him on my back, fed him, sheltered him, gave him everything I had. And this was his gratitude, to steal from me, the very person who saved him. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the walls. I had built with my own two hands, walls that no longer belonged to me. Anger pulsed through my veins, but so did something else, heartbreak. How could Daniel, my brother, my own flesh and blood, betray me like this? Memories came flooding back. The nights I skipped meals so he could eat. The winters I wore a torn jacket so he could have the warmer one. The hours I worked when my body screamed for rest, all for him. And now, he had stripped me of the only thing I had left. I went to my mother's grave the next day and knelt down. "Ma," I whispered, tears falling onto the soil. "I did everything to keep us together. I thought Daniel would honor our family, but he's destroyed it. What do I do now?" For the first time in my life, silence gave me an answer, and that answer was clear. I couldn't let this betrayal go unpunished. Daniel thought he was clever, that I was too weak, too naive to fight back, but he had underestimated me. I wasn't going to beg for what was mine. I wasn't going to cry in silence. If Daniel wanted to play games, I would show him how cruel karma could be. From that day forward, I stopped looking at Daniel as my brother. To me, he was a thief in my own bloodline, a snake I had fed and raised with my own hands. And like every snake, he needed to be dealt with carefully. At first, I played along. I acted like nothing had happened. I greeted him with the same smile, shared meals, even asked him about his so-called business ventures. I let him believe that I had accepted my fate, that I was too broken to fight back. Daniel thrived on that illusion. The more helpless I looked, the bolder he became. But behind closed doors I was planning. I began visiting lawyers in secret, showing them the papers, asking questions about loopholes and fraud. Most shook their heads, telling me, "You signed willingly, there's nothing you can do." But one old attorney leaned back in his chair, adjusted his glasses, and said something that lit a fire inside me. "Just because the ink is on the paper doesn't mean the story is over. If fraud or manipulation can be proven, the courts will listen. You just need evidence, solid evidence." That was the moment my grief hardened into resolve. If Daniel wanted a war, I would give him one. Began watching him closely, noting his late-night calls, the strange people visiting him, the money he flashed but never explained. Slowly, a pattern emerged. My brother wasn't just greedy, he was reckless. And reckless men always leave cracks behind. Meanwhile, I tightened my circle. I spoke to neighbors, gathered their stories, and some admitted they had seen Daniel whispering with shady characters, handling envelopes thick with cash. One even said, "I don't know what your brother's into, but it's not good. Be careful." Careful was exactly what I planned to be. Each piece of information I collected was like a brick, and brick by brick I was building my case. A case not just to take back what was mine, but to expose Daniel for what he truly was. A fraud, a traitor, and a disgrace to our family name. But I couldn't rush. One wrong move, and he'd vanish with everything before I could strike. So, I waited, watched, and prepared. Every night before bed I repeated one promise to myself. The day will come when Daniel realizes he didn't trick me. He signed his own downfall. And as I stared at the property that was once mine, I whispered into the empty halls, "Karma is coming, brother. Faster than you can imagine." Daniel thought he had won. Every time he walked past me inside the house, his chest puffed out a little more, his voice carried a little extra arrogance. He strutted like a king in a castle he never built, flashing money, bragging to anyone who would listen. He began hosting parties at the property, my property. Loud music, strangers drinking in the living room I once cherished, people trampling the floors I had built with my bare hands. I would sit quietly in the corner, watching the destruction, my fists clenched, but my face blank. Daniel mistook my silence for defeat. That was his biggest mistake. The more comfortable he got, the more reckless he became. He started bragging about big deals he was making, boasting that soon he'd be the richest man in town. He laughed in my face, once saying, "Brother, you always worked like a mule." But me, I'm smart, I know how to play the system, that's why I'll always be ahead. Inside I burned, but outwardly I smiled, nodded, and poured him another drink. I noticed something else too. Money came in fast, but it disappeared, just as quickly. Daniel bought expensive cars, jewelry, and designer clothes. People whispered that he was gambling. Others hinted he was getting involved in something darker. Whatever it was, one thing was clear. Daniel wasn't building wealth, he was burning it. That's when I realized karma didn't need me to destroy him. Daniel was already digging his own grave. All I had to do was make sure he fell in and couldn't climb back out. So I started documenting everything. The shady men who came to the house, the wads of cash exchanged behind closed doors, the mysterious phone calls. I kept records, photos, even recordings when I could. Piece by piece, I was weaving a web that would one day trap him. One night, after yet another wild party, I found Daniel passed out on the couch, a bottle rolling from his hand. His phone buzzed beside him. Normally, I would never invade his privacy, but this wasn't about curiosity, it was survival. I picked it up and glanced at the messages. What I saw made my stomach twist. There were threats, angry texts demanding money, warnings about consequences if he didn't pay on time. One even said, "You think you can trick us? We'll make you disappear." In that moment I knew the truth. Daniel wasn't a mastermind, he was a pawn playing with people far more dangerous than he understood, and sooner or later they would come collecting. It didn't take long for Daniel's troubles to start spilling into my life. At first it was just the late-night phone calls and nervous pacing. Then came the knocks at the door. One evening, around midnight, there was a heavy pounding that shook the walls. I opened the door to find two men standing there, broad-shouldered, faces hard as stone. They didn't bother with introductions. "Where's Daniel?" one of them growled. "He's not here," I said cautiously. The taller man leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Tell him his time is running out. If he doesn't pay up, we'll take payment another way. And trust me, you don't want to know what that means." They shoved past me, scanning the house as if they already owned it. My blood boiled. This was my home, yet strangers were storming in, threatening me because of Daniel's reckless greed. When they finally left, I found Daniel, hiding in the backyard, pretending he had been smoking. I grabbed him by the collar. "What have you dragged into this house?" I demanded. He brushed me off with a sneer. "Relax, I've got it under control." Under control. My brother was playing with fire, and he was too arrogant to see the flames closing in. That night, as I lay awake, I realized I had two choices. Either let Daniel's chaos destroy everything I had left, or turn his downfall into my opportunity for justice. I chose the latter. The next day, I started reaching out to the very men Daniel owed money to. At first, they didn't trust me, But once I explained who I was, the foolish brother Daniel had tricked, they listened. I offered them information, proof of Daniel's lies, and a plan that would ensure he paid every debt one way or another. In return, all I asked was simple. When the time came, they would testify, confirm Daniel's deceit, and back me up legally. Surprisingly, they agreed. Maybe they were tired of Daniel's games too. Meanwhile, Daniel had no idea I was orchestrating the trap. He continued to swagger around the house, throwing money he didn't have, pretending to be untouchable. But every reckless step he took was being recorded, documented, and prepared as ammunition, and I'll never forget the look on his face one evening when he caught me staring at him from across the room. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked nervously. I smiled, just wondering how long you can keep pretending. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in. It started small, like cracks in a wall no one notices, until the whole structure collapses. First, Daniel's car was repossessed. I watched from the porch as men in uniforms hooked it up to a tow truck while he shouted and cursed, waving his fists helplessly. That shiny car he had bragged about, the one he used to show off his success, gone in minutes. Then came the phone calls. This time they weren't threats, they were warnings. "This is your last chance, Daniel." His voice grew more panicked with each call. He would slam his phone down, sweat pouring down his face, muttering curses under his breath. I stayed, silent, just watching. Every lie, every boast he had ever made was crumbling before him. One night the inevitable happened. He burst into my room, wild-eyed, his hands shaking. "Brother, I need your help," he said desperately. "You've always been the one to save me. Please, just loan me some money. I swear I'll pay you back." I looked at him for a long moment. This was the same man who had stolen my home, who had signed away my future. And now here he was, begging for scraps like a lost child. Calmly, I said, "You told me once I worked like a mule. Maybe it's time you learn what it feels like to carry your own weight." His face twisted in shock and anger. "So you're just going to abandon me, after everything?" I almost laughed. After everything? He had betrayed me, stolen from me, humiliated me. And yet somehow, in his twisted mind, he was the victim. From that moment, Daniel's downfall accelerated. The people he owed money to stopped being polite. They came to the house in broad daylight, pounding on the doors, shouting his name so loudly the whole neighborhood heard. Daniel started sneaking out through the back gate, avoiding everyone, including me. But what he didn't realize was that every desperate step he took was falling right into the trap I had set. The evidence was complete. The debts, the threats, the shady deals, the fraud, all of it tied directly to him. One evening, as he sat hunched at the kitchen table, his head buried in his hands, I quietly slid a folder across to him. Inside were copies of everything I had collected, photos, statements, even transcripts. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. What is this?" I leaned forward and whispered, "It's your life, Daniel, and soon it's going to catch up with you." His face went pale. For the first time, he realized he wasn't in control anymore. Karma wasn't just coming. It was already knocking on his door. Daniel stared at the folder as if it were a ticking bomb. His hands shook when he flipped through the pages, every shady deal, every loan, every threat carefully documented. His lips moved, but no words came out. For once, the man who never stopped talking had nothing to say. I leaned back in my chair, calm and collected. "You thought you outsmarted me, Daniel. You thought stealing my property would make you powerful, but all you did was put a rope around your own neck." He slammed the folder shut and snarled, "You wouldn't dare! You're my brother!" I chuckled bitterly. "Brother? Did that word stop you when you tricked me into signing away everything I owned? Did it mean anything when you watched me suffer while you lived like a king on my blood and sweat?" For a moment, his bravado cracked. His face paled and he whispered, "Please. You can't do this, help me, just one more time, I'll fix it, I swear." But I had heard that lie too many times, and now I wasn't interested in fixing his mistakes. I was interested in justice. The next morning, I made my move. With the evidence in hand, I went straight to the authorities. Lawyers, police, even some of the very men Daniel owed money to backed my claims. Piece by piece, the case against him grew undeniable. Fraud, forgery, illegal dealings, gambling debts. He wasn't just a failed brother. He was a criminal. When the summons arrived, Daniel's world collapsed. I watched from the porch as officers walked through my front gate to serve him papers. His voice rose in desperation, shouting, "This is a mistake! I'm innocent!" But the truth was written on every page, every debt, every lie he had spun. Neighbors gathered to watch, whispering among themselves. The same people he had bragged to now stared at him with disgust. His empire of lies crumbled in front of the very audience he once sought to impress. And me? I just stood there silently, arms crossed, watching karma play out exactly as I had promised. But this was only the beginning, because while Daniel's downfall had started, the property, my property, was still tied up in his name. And to reclaim it fully, I would need more than just evidence. I would need to outsmart him in the very system he thought he had mastered. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The papers had been served, but that was only the opening shot in what I knew would be a long battle. Taking Daniel down on the streets was easy. His arrogance and debts had already ruined his reputation. But reclaiming what was mine legally, that required precision. I met with the old attorney again, the one who had told me fraud could overturn even the strongest signature. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers, and said, "Your brother thought he played you, but he made mistakes. Big ones. If we can prove he manipulated you into signing that transfer, the court will tear it apart." His words gave me hope, but also a grim understanding. This wasn't going to be simple. Daniel had wrapped himself in lies, and like a spider in his own web, he would fight viciously to keep from being caught. Meanwhile, Daniel grew desperate. The pressure of debts, the stares of neighbors, the constant phone calls from creditors. It was eating him alive. He barely slept, pacing the house like a prisoner. His once proud voice now cracked with fear. One night I overheard him on the phone, pleading, "I'll get the money, I promise. I just need more time. My brother, he owes me, he'll help." I almost laughed. Owes him after everything he stole. His delusion was staggering. But that was Daniel. He believed his own lies so deeply that he thought everyone else would too. When the court date finally arrived, I felt a surge of nerves. Walking into that courthouse, clutching my folder of evidence, I remembered all the years I had sacrificed for Daniel. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about justice, about proving that I was not the fool he thought I was. Daniel showed up in a crisp suit, trying to look confident, but I saw the cracks. The sweat on his forehead, the twitch in his jaw, the way his eyes darted around the room. He wasn't the king he once pretended to be. He was a cornered man, and he knew it. The judge called the case, and as Daniel's lawyer began to speak, spinning his polished lies, I felt my heart hammering in my chest. But I wasn't afraid because I knew the truth was on my side. And this time I had no intention of losing. This wasn't just a battle for property. This was war. I clenched my fists but kept calm. I had expected nothing less. Daniel sat beside his lawyer, nodding along as if he were some kind of saint. He even had the nerve to glance at me with that familiar smirk, the same one he used when we were kids, stealing cookies and blaming me for it. But then it was my turn. My lawyer rose, tall and firm, and began laying down the evidence like bricks, in a wall. First, the timeline of Daniel's debts. Bank records, unpaid loans, creditors' letters. It painted a picture of a man drowning financially long before he convinced me to sign anything. Then, the witness statements, neighbors who recalled how Daniel bragged about tricking his brother into handing over the land. One even remembered him laughing, saying, "He signed without even reading, too easy." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie. Finally, the document analysis. An expert testified that the transfer papers had been altered after my signature. Small. Changes subtle enough to fool the untrained eye but clear to a professional. The courtroom grew tense. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a glare. Daniel's confidence cracked. I saw his hands trembling as he reached for a glass of water, spilling a little on his suit. His face reddened, and for the first time, He looked small, not the cunning manipulator who stole from me, but a desperate man cornered by truth. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Mr. Daniel, do you have any explanation for these inconsistencies?" Daniel stammered. Words tumbled out, excuses tangled with lies, but none of it made sense. His smooth act was crumbling right there in front of everyone. In that moment, I realized something. The property didn't just represent land or money. It represented my dignity, my trust, my years of sacrifice. And watching Daniel squirm, exposed and humiliated, was the beginning of the justice I had been waiting for. The hearing wasn't over, but the tide had turned. For the first time, Daniel knew karma was here. The air in the courtroom felt thick, almost suffocating. Every shuffle of paper, every cough, echoed louder than it should have. The judge's eyes remained locked on Daniel, waiting for an explanation he clearly didn't have. Daniel's lawyer jumped in, desperate to regain control. "Your Honor, while the evidence may suggest irregularities, it's important to remember that my client and his brother had a close relationship. This was a family matter, not a criminal one. Surely misunderstandings can occur." "Misunderstandings?" I snapped before I could stop myself. My voice carried across the silent room. "He lied, manipulated, and forged documents to steal what my parents entrusted to me. That's not a misunderstanding, it's betrayal." The judge raised a hand to calm me, but I noticed a flicker of approval in her eyes. She had seen enough cases to tell the difference between regret and deceit. Daniel, desperate now, leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. A new stack of papers was quickly produced, and his lawyer presented them like a magic trick. "Your Honor, here are additional agreements, proof that the property was willingly transferred in exchange for financial assistance. My client helped his brother when he was struggling, and this land was a repayment." The room buzzed, people shifted in their seats, whispering. Even I felt my heart jolt. Was this possible? Did Daniel actually prepare a backup plan to twist the truth again? But my lawyer remained calm. He examined the documents, flipping page after page, then looked up with a smile. "Your Honor, these are blatant fabrications. Not only do the dates not match the property records, but the signatures are digitally copied. Notice the identical pen stroke pattern on every page. It's an amateur forgery." Gasps erupted. Daniel's face turned ghostly pale. His lawyer fumbled with the pages, stuttering, but the damage was done. The judge slammed her gavel for silence. "Mr. Daniel," she said sternly, "introducing false evidence is a serious offense. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Daniel muttered something unintelligible, his shoulders sagging. For once, there was no arrogance in him, just fear. Watching him crumble, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes. Satisfaction, too. But also sadness. This was my brother, the boy I grew up with, who once shared the same room, the same meals, the same dreams. Now he was nothing more than a stranger who had sold his soul to greed. The judge announced a recess before the final ruling. As we stood, Daniel wouldn't even look at me. His world was collapsing, and he knew it. But deep down, I also knew. He wasn't finished yet. A man like Daniel would try one last desperate move before the end. When the court reconvened after recess, the air was electric with anticipation. Everyone knew the end was near. Daniel walked back to his seat, looking like a man walking toward his own execution. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes darting nervously around the room, as if searching for a miracle that would never come. The judge entered, her expression stern and unreadable. She wasted no time. "This court has reviewed the evidence, testimonies, and documents presented. The conclusion is clear. The property transfer was obtained through manipulation and fraud. The court hereby nullifies the agreement and returns full ownership to the plaintiff." The words struck like a thunderclap. Relief washed over me so powerfully that I had to grip the table to steady myself. Years of sacrifice, trust, and betrayal, all leading to this moment of vindication. My land, my legacy, was finally back where it belonged. But the judge wasn't finished. She turned her gaze to Daniel, her voice sharp as a blade. "Furthermore, Mr. Daniel, This court cannot overlook your attempt to introduce forged documents. Such actions carry consequences. You will face a separate investigation for perjury and fraud. Until then, you are fined and barred from any claim on this property." The color drained from Daniel's face. He shot to his feet, shouting, "This isn't fair. He was always the favorite. You never gave me anything, and now you're taking away the only chance I had." His outburst echoed through the courtroom, raw and bitter. The bailiff moved closer, ready to restrain him. But Daniel wasn't finished. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he pointed at me. "You think you've won? You think you're better than me? You'll regret this." But his words carried no power anymore. Everyone in the room had seen the truth. The judge ordered him to sit down, her patience gone. "Mr. Daniel, control yourself. You have no one to blame but your own choices." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Daniel slumped into his chair, defeated. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who realized karma had finally caught up with him. As I walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight hit my face, warm and freeing. People congratulated me, shook my hand, but all I felt was a deep, quiet peace. Justice had been served, not just by the law, but by life itself. Daniel had tricked me into signing away my property, but in the end, it wasn't me who lost everything. It was him. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a strange calm I hadn't known in years. For so long I had carried the weight of betrayal on my shoulders. Every night I'd lie awake, replaying Daniel's smirk when he tricked me, hearing his mocking voice in my head. But now, for the first time, I could breathe. The property was legally mine again. The farm that my parents had poured their sweat into, the land where I had grown up, where I buried my father under that old oak tree. It was safe. That alone felt like victory. But justice wasn't just about winning back the land. Justice was about watching Daniel's world unravel. And that unraveling had already begun. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. They wanted a statement from me, but their real target was Daniel. When Daniel emerged, he looked like a broken man. The same reporters who once praised his business ventures now shouted questions like arrows. "Daniel, why did you forge documents? Did you really steal your brother's property? How much debt are you actually in?" He tried to push past them, but the crowd was relentless. For the first time, Daniel wasn't in control of the narrative. His dirty secrets were spilling into the open, and the world was eager to watch him drown in them. Back at the property, I walked the field slowly, letting the soil run through my fingers. Memories rushed back. My mother teaching me how to plant seeds, my father showing me how to mend fences. I felt them with me in that moment, as if they had been waiting for me to reclaim what was rightfully ours. But I wasn't naive. Daniel wasn't finished. He was cornered, humiliated, and desperate. And a man like that is dangerous. That night, as I sat on the porch, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. On the other end was Daniel's voice, hoarse and trembling. "You think you've won," he spat. "But this isn't over. You destroyed me, brother, and I swear I'll destroy you too." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking slightly. A part of me pitied him, but another part, the stronger part, knew this was the path he had chosen. What Daniel didn't understand was that karma wasn't finished with him yet, and when it came, it would hit harder than he ever imagined. In the weeks after the trial, Daniel's downfall accelerated faster than anyone could have predicted. The news spread like wildfire. Local man caught in property fraud against own brother. His name was plastered across newspapers, TV screens, and social media. The community that once respected him now looked at him with disgust. Creditors came knocking at his door. He had borrowed money from nearly everyone, banks, private lenders, even shady men you don't want to owe. Now, with his reputation destroyed and his lies exposed, no one was willing to give him another chance. I heard from mutual acquaintances that his house was repossessed within a month, his car too. One by one, the possessions he had flaunted, symbols of his false success, were stripped away. But the worst blow wasn't financial. It was personal. His wife, unable to endure the humiliation, filed for divorce. She packed up the children and left, moving back with her parents. I was told she had screamed at him during their final argument. "You ruined this family with your greed. You destroyed everything we had." Daniel was left alone, rattling around in an empty house, drowning in debts he couldn't pay. I should have felt satisfied. This was karma, pure and simple. The man who betrayed me was now paying the price, stripped of everything he thought mattered. And yet, when I looked at the land outside my window, I couldn't help but feel a strange sadness. He was my brother, after all. We had once played in these fields together, dreamed under the same sky. How had we become enemies? How had greed twisted him so far? One evening, I received a letter. No envelope, no return address, just my name scrawled on the front. Inside, the handwriting was shaky but unmistakably Daniel's. "You may have won in court, but you ruined me. My wife, my kids, my life, it's all gone because of you. One day, you'll understand the pain I feel. And when that day comes, you'll regret ever standing against me." I folded the letter slowly, my heart heavy. It wasn't an apology, it was a threat. Daniel hadn't learned his lesson. He was still blinded by rage, still convinced I was the villain in his story. Knew then that this wasn't just about property anymore. This was about survival. Because when a desperate man has nothing left to lose, he becomes dangerous. And Daniel had just reached that point. Nights grew quieter on my property, but inside me, a storm was brewing. I had my land back, my peace slowly returning. Yet Daniel's words from the phone call and that bitter letter haunted me. A brother who had lost everything wasn't going to sit quietly and fade away. And I was right. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I noticed something odd. The lock on my barn, old but sturdy, was broken, tools scattered on the floor, things missing. It wasn't hard to guess who was behind it. Daniel. I called the sheriff, who confirmed my suspicion. Daniel had been seen around town, disheveled, muttering to himself. He had pawned off stolen items, desperate for cash. The man who once strutted with pride now lurked in shadows, reduced to petty theft. But it didn't stop there. A week later, I woke up to find spray paint scrawled across my property's front gate. "Thief, liar, you'll pay." My stomach twisted. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a warning. My neighbors, worried for me, suggested I press charges, but I hesitated. Despite everything, a part of me still hoped Daniel might realize how far he'd fallen and seek redemption. That hope shattered the night he showed up at my doorstep. It was past midnight. The knock was loud, frantic, almost violent. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, wild-eyed, his clothes filthy, his breath stinking of alcohol. "You took everything from me," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "My family, my home, my life, you ruined it all." I stepped back, my hand inching toward the phone. "Daniel, you did this to yourself. You lied, you cheated, you forged documents. I didn't destroy you, you destroyed yourself." He lunged forward, jabbing a finger into my chest. "Don't lecture me. You think you're better than me because the court believed your lies? You'll regret this, brother. I swear it." Noise woke the neighbors. Lights flicked on around the property. When the sheriff arrived minutes later, Daniel was still yelling, veins bulging in his neck. They pulled him away, his voice echoing in the night. "This isn't over." As the squad car disappeared into the darkness, I stood on the porch, trembling. My land was safe, yes, but my brother had become a storm that refused to pass, and storms, no matter how broken, always leave destruction in their path. After that night, I knew one thing for certain. Daniel was spiraling out of control, and sooner or later something irreversible would happen. The sheriff filed a restraining order against him, keeping him legally barred from stepping foot near my property. At first I thought that might calm things down, but desperation doesn't respect boundaries. Weeks passed. I heard whispers in town. Daniel was squatting in an abandoned cabin, drinking himself half to death, trying to scrape together money from anyone foolish enough to lend it. But the community that once welcomed him had turned its back. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at diners and grocery stores. Then came the breaking point. One stormy evening, news spread that Daniel had been caught trying to break into a business downtown. He wasn't after cash registers. He was after documents, proof, anything he could twist into claiming I had framed him. But the evidence wasn't there. Instead, the police caught him red-handed with burglary tools. This time there was no lawyer to smooth things over. No fabricated documents, no sympathy, just cold, hard consequences. Daniel was arrested, charged, and denied bail. I attended the hearing, sitting quietly at the back of the courtroom. It was almost poetic. Roles reversed. Now Daniel stood alone, shackled, trembling before a judge who had no patience left for his excuses. The ruling was swift, prison time, not just for the burglary, but also for the forgery and fraud that had resurfaced in the investigation. As the gavel fell, Daniel turned his head and saw me in the gallery. His eyes burned with a mix of rage and despair. He mouthed the words, "This is your fault." But for the first time his accusation didn't sting, because I knew the truth. This wasn't my fault. It was the sum of his choices. Greed, lies, betrayal that had led him here. When they led him away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, just closure. Back on my land, I stood beneath the oak tree where my father once told me, "A man's worth isn't in what he takes, but in what he protects." Daniel had taken and taken until nothing was left. And me? I had protected. My family's legacy, my parents' trust, my own dignity. Karma had done its work. My brother tricked me into signing away my property. But in the end, he lost everything, and I gained something far greater than land. I gained peace. Greed may break families, but stories like these remind us that justice always finds its way. Want to hear more shocking family betrayals and ultimate karma? Then like, subscribe, and hit the bell. The next story might just leave you speechless.